Well, hello, friends. Good to see you today. Thank you for tuning in. My Bible is open to Job chapter 22. Job 22. I want you to get your Bible and open there with me as we look at Job 22 and 23 today. Job 22 begins the third round of speeches from Job's friends towards Job and then his responses to each of their speeches. So we've gone through two rounds of speeches now where each of the friends have spoken their piece to Job. He's given his response. And the first round of speeches, it seemed that maybe the big idea that was being discussed in that first round of speeches was what Job's friends and what Job himself even thought about God. And why was God doing this? Why was God letting these things happen and so forth? It was kind of a lofty consideration on their part. And then in the second round of speeches, the focus, it seems, the theme of the speeches really shifted more to the idea of, well, wicked people are going to suffer because of their wickedness and because of their unrighteousness, and that's what's happening. You know, Job, you're a sinner, and that's why all these bad things are happening. And that idea doesn't completely go away when we get into the third round of speeches. In fact, we see it here in Eliphaz's third speech, beginning in chapter 22. He starts off by talking about a very general idea, again, about the wicked people and what is going to happen to them. And then he really starts to make specific application of his general premise to Job and to his circumstance. So look at chapter 22, and in verse 2, Eliphaz says, "Can a man be of any use to God? Can even a wise man be of use to him? Does it delight the Almighty if you are righteous? Does he profit if you perfect your behavior?" Job, you've been saying throughout all of our discussions that you're innocent, that you've not done anything wrong. You've been maintaining your righteousness and your integrity. Does that actually do God any good if you are a righteous man? Does he delight in that? Does he benefit from that? In verse 4, he asks, "Does he correct you and take you to court because of your piety? Isn't your wickedness abundant, and aren't your iniquities endless?" Job, you need to be honest with yourself, Eliphaz says. Aren't your iniquities actually piled up to the skies? Job, if you were truly being honest, which what he's implying and really directly stating without using these words is, Job, you've been saying that you're innocent, but we know the truth. You must be guilty. You must be a wicked man. And now, after giving this kind of general theme to where he's about to go, Eliphaz starts to give specific sins that he thinks Job is guilty of. This part astounds me. He starts rattling off this list of things that he thinks Job has done. He provides no evidence. He has no basis whatsoever for saying any of this to Job, and yet he just starts rattling off all of the things that Job has supposedly done. So look at verse 6. "You took collateral from your brothers without cause, stripping off their clothes and leaving them naked. You gave no water to the thirsty and withheld food from the famished, while the land belonged to a powerful man and an influential man lived on it." Presumably Job is that man of verse 8. You are a powerful man who has all of this influence, and you are depriving other poorer people of the things that they need to sustain life. You're not helping anybody. You're not being benevolent or generous with all of your wealth. Verse 9, "You sent widows away empty-handed, and the strength of the fatherless was crushed." You see all of these specific things that Eliphaz says Job is guilty of. He is indicting Job on specific charges. But there's no evidence. There's no basis for any of this. Notice that Eliphaz doesn't say things like, I remember watching you do this. I saw you do this. Or, there's a record over here of you having done this wrong. He doesn't provide any any evidence or justification. He just starts throwing out these charges of things that Job is possibly guilty of. Well, Job, I've seen other wealthy, powerful, rich men do these things. Therefore, you must have done them too. And so he comes to the conclusion of this little section in verse 10 when he says, therefore, for all of these sins that you're guilty of, therefore snares surround you, and sudden dread terrifies you, or darkness so you cannot see, and a flood of waters covers you. Job, these are the reasons why all of these bad things are happening. Eliphaz has no understanding, he has no concept at all in his thinking about a righteous man suffering and enduring the things that Job has endured. Eliphaz has no room for that kind of thinking. In his mind, if you suffer, it's karma, it's payback, it's because you're guilty of something. God is giving you your just due. That's the way his mind thinks. Job is therefore guilty of doing these bad things. And so Job is going to listen to Eliphaz make these charges, and he's going to respond in the next two chapters. But before we get to Job's response in chapter 23, I want you to look at verse 21 of chapter 22. Eliphaz has continued speaking and talking about God and how he deals with the wicked. And so he encourages Job in verse 21, come to terms with God and be at peace. In this way, good will come to you. Receive instruction from his mouth and place his sayings in your heart. If you return to the Almighty, you will be renewed. If you banish injustice from your tent and consign your gold to the dust, the gold of Ophir to the stones in the wadis, the Almighty will be your gold and your finest silver. Then you will delight in the Almighty and lift up your face to God. You will pray to him and he will hear you, and you will fulfill your vows, and on it goes. The idea is you need to turn back to God. This is the reason that you are suffering. This is why things in your life are the way they are. You have forgotten about God, and you need to turn back to him. So Job is going to respond in chapter 23 and chapter 24. So let's look at chapter 23 now, where Job gives his response to Eliphaz. Job answered, today my complaint is bitter. His hand is heavy despite my groaning. If only I knew how to find him, so that I could go to his throne. I would plead my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would learn how he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he prosecute me forcefully? No, he would certainly pay attention to me. Then an upright man could reason with him, and I would escape from my judge forever. I think there is a subtle response there. It doesn't seem direct, but maybe indirect and more subtle to Eliphaz's charges. Eliphaz, who said all these things that Job was guilty of, you've oppressed widows and the fatherless, and you've crushed the poor and the needy and so forth. I think Job is indirectly responding to those things. And he says, I could stand before God and I could present my case and give my arguments before him. I would love to have the opportunity to do that, because God would find me guiltless. God would see that he would find no basis of prosecuting me or finding me guilty. So again, Job is holding on to his righteousness. But Job says in chapter 23 now in verse 8, if I go east, he is not there, and if I go west, I cannot perceive him. When he is at work in the north, I cannot see him. When he turns south, I cannot find him. And yet he knows the way I have taken. When he has tested me, I will emerge as pure gold. My feet have followed in his tracks. I have kept to his way and not turned aside. I have not departed from the commands from his lips. I have treasured the words from his mouth more than my daily food. All right, a couple of things that I want to call your attention to in that section, verses 8 through 12. First of all, if you look back at chapter 22 to Eliphaz's statements to Job, remember in verse 21 of chapter 22, Eliphaz encouraged him to return to God. Come to terms with God, be at peace. Verse 22, receive instruction from his mouth and place his sayings in your heart. Job, you need to listen to what God says. Job responds to that directly in chapter 23 when he says, verse 11, my feet have followed in his tracks. I have kept to his way and not turned aside. I have not departed from the commands from his lips. I have treasured the words from his mouth more than my daily food. Stop telling me that I need to turn back to the words of God. I've been doing that all along. I have followed carefully everything that God has told me to do. So that is a direct response to Eliphaz's encouragement to him in chapter 22. And I don't mean encouragement in a good way. I mean his encouragement to turn back to what God said. Job says, I've been doing that all along. Stop telling me to do that. But here's another thing I want you to see in this section in Job chapter 23. Job 23, verses 8 and 9, Job talks about the four directions. North, south, east, west. He says, wherever I look, I can't find God. I can't see God. I can't understand God, no matter where I look for him. And I think that's just a figurative kind of way of Job saying, none of this makes sense. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to wrap my mind around what is happening to me and where is God in all of this. I've looked in every direction and I can't understand all of this. I think that's effectively what Job is saying there. And yet, here's what Job understands. Verse 10, and yet he knows the way that I have taken. I've pointed out before in another video that even though Job, in terms of explanations, is grasping at straws, he doesn't understand, none of this is making sense. Even though that doesn't make sense, he still holds on to God because God is the only thing left to hold on to. Job has still not surrendered his faith. And his statements like this that are scattered throughout Job's speeches in the book, where you realize Job is suffering so intensely, Job is just paralyzed and gripped by what's happening to him. He cannot make sense of this, and yet he still knows one thing above everything else, and that is God is his only source of hope. And he says, even though I can't see God in this, I can't explain what God is doing in all of this, God knows the path of life which I have chosen. God knows that I am a righteous man. God knows that I love him and that I serve him and that I'm true to him. God knows the way that I have taken. And he says in verse 10 that when he has tested me, I will emerge as pure gold. Job has this beautiful expression in the midst of this darkness and suffering. He understands, when I get to the other side of this, I'm going to be stronger. I'm going to be better. So Job understands. He understands that good can come from this, even though he can't understand what's currently happening to him. And what an amazing thing to be able to say. I know the path that I've chosen. God knows the path that I've chosen, and God will see me through this. I will be vindicated, and I'm going to come through this as pure gold. Now, chapter 23, let's continue verse 13. But he is unchangeable. Who can oppose him? He does what he desires. He will certainly accomplish what he has decreed for me, and he has many more things like these in mind. Therefore I am terrified in his presence. When I consider this, I am afraid of him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. Yet I am not destroyed by the darkness, by the thick darkness that covers my face. Now, Job's reply to Eliphaz is going to continue on through chapter 24, and we'll read that, Lord willing, tomorrow. But Job is walking this fine line. This line between trying to understand what's happening, and he acknowledges that he can't, and then holding on to faith in God anyways, which he is clearly doing his utmost to do. Good for him, and credit to him for having the sense of understanding, for having the wherewithal to say, God is hiding from me what he's doing. I don't understand what he is doing. He says in these last verses, this last section of chapter 23, God's going to do what he desires. He's going to do through me and for me whatever it is that he has determined is right. And I don't understand it. But I'm not going to let this darkness destroy me. And see, that's the other side. That's the other side. That's where faith speaks through and shines through that darkness and says, no matter what happens, I'm going to hold on to God because he is all that I've got left to hold on to. And Job is just such an incredible character of faith and a wonderful example of strong faith and holding on to faith in the midst of trials. Let these little glimpses into Job's thinking and into his faith, let those glimpses encourage you and build you up as you read through these speeches and these responses that Job gives. Stay with the reading. I know that the speeches can kind of get tedious and they're saying the same things again and again, but just try to remember the circumstances. Try to put yourself in Job's position. How would you take it if your friends were saying these kinds of things to you? How would you feel if you were wrestling with deep things that you couldn't really understand and you didn't have the information that you and I have today as people who read the scriptures, but you were in Job's position and you didn't have all of those things? Just try to continually put yourself in his position and think about these amazing statements of faith that Job is giving throughout these speeches. Thanks for reading with me today. God bless you.